Let's focus on our conversation here with Joel Klatt, the lead analyst for Fox. He joins us from our Fox studios in L.A. as he does every week. And Joel, I want to start with something that you tweeted on Monday. You put forth a scenario basically making the assumption, as I think a lot of people are, that Clemson and Alabama go undefeated. Four other teams, one loss OSU is a Big Ten champ, unbeaten Washington is a Pac-12 champ, once beaten Oklahoma is a Big 12 champ, Georgia having lost only to Bama, and then your question was which two go to the playoff. So I'm throwing that right back at you. What do you think?
I thought this was supposed to be a hypothetical for everybody else.
No, right? No. This was for you. You made your bet, and now you must lie in it, Klatt.
Exactly. Good call. And beside the fact that I got everyone's record wrong on that, bottom line is to me, an undefeated conference champ would have to go. So Washington would be kind of the clear third team. And the reason I posed the question is the interesting scenario that let's just play it out, that Oklahoma and Ohio State are vying for a fourth spot as both conference champions and both have just one loss. And it happens to be the one loss for Ohio State is to Oklahoma. It's an interesting question because you could see all the bullets in Ohio State's chambers down this stretch, right? You got Penn State, you got Michigan. They've got a lot of things left to accomplish on their resume, and their resume would likely look better than Oklahoma's, but then there would be that asterisk there for that September loss at home. If I had to, I'm a big believer, and I know that, listen, I'm going to see Ohio State. I saw them last week. I'm going to see them again this week. If that scenario played out, I would probably be more apt to reward Oklahoma because I'm a big believer that the games that actually are played on the field have to mean more than the resumes that are put in front of 13 individuals in a subjective conference room. So from that standpoint, my answer would be Washington and Oklahoma.
Joel, you made an interesting point about Urban talking to you, I guess, on Friday about, he said, correct me if I'm wrong, that if they had better offensive tackle play, they would be an elite team. My question is, how far are they away from getting the tackle play that they want? And maybe how's their offensive line compared to some of the better offensive lines you've seen this year?
Yeah, Coach, is a good question. I think that they're 50% of the way there. I think that they're getting that from their left tackle, Jamarco Jones, but they're not getting that on the other side from Prince. And Prince is a guy that's played a lot of football, and they're just not quite getting that play from him that they want or expect. Part of it is a depth issue. They didn't have anybody pushing Prince, and therefore they didn't have that competition, that spirited competition in spring football and in fall camp to get that heightened level of play out of him. It really makes no mistake about it now. If they can run the football like they were able to do a couple of years ago, in particular with both Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins in the backfield now, both of them healthy, they're going to be an elite team. And Coach Meyer just understands that there's just a couple of positions that's going to hang on. He understands that if he can protect his passer and run the football, they're going to be able to score points. They're going to be able to score points in bunches. And that's why he said that to me. And quite frankly, I thought last week was okay. But even Urban Meyer will tell you that his measuring stick is not going to be Maryland. His measuring stick's probably not even going to be Nebraska. While he wants to go out there and play well, his measuring stick is going to be when he comes down the stretch and he sees teams like Penn State or Michigan State or Michigan. And that's where he's going to be able to measure where that tackle play is at.
Another thing Urban Meyer did tell us over the weekend that he was not pleased about a specific call that occurred in the Maryland game over the weekend. As we reflect back to that, the Buckeyes had no problem taking care of Maryland, 62-14 on this one, but Denzel Ward was ejected in the first quarter for a controversial targeting call, which he appeared to have forced a fumble with a hard hit on the wide receiver Taven Jacobs, but the officials stopped the play, ruled it an incomplete pass, and targeting. The call was confirmed on the replay. Urban Meyer's reaction? Not pleased.
You know, on the field, it's a snap judgment, but the replay official was an error. And so we're going to reward Denzel Ward today at practice for a caused fumble, and he should not have been ejected, and it was a mistake. I still to this day don't understand how that happens, but that's for the higher-ups to figure out. And yeah, of course, concern's probably not strong enough.
So the Big Ten has since addressed this, saying that call was unwarranted. But, Joel, at the end of the day, it's about player safety, but this targeting has been controversial for many weeks now. What do you make of this entire situation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to that question, right? There's the rule itself and the adjustments that I feel need to be made to that rule. And then there's some other, nuances to this specific instance with Denzel Ward and the hit against Maryland last Saturday. First, I'll talk about the rule. First of all, I think that the rule right now is way too broad. And therefore, you're putting a lot of different types of hits all into the same bucket, and then you're pouring that bucket out of the game and ejecting all of those players. I think that the targeting rule desperately needs a second category, very similar to how in the NBA you've got a flagrant 1 and a flagrant 2. You can have a flagrant foul, or in this case, targeting, but you don't have to eject players for every instance of targeting. First and foremost, if you are launching yourself and using your helmet or the crown of your helmet as a weapon, you should be ejected. And those hits, I completely agree. We need to take care of the game. We need to be stewards of the game and stewards of these players. Then there's the instance of forcible contact to the head or neck area. If you are specifically targeting that area of a defenseless player, you should also be ejected. But then there's this other scenario, and this is where I'm talking about a different category. Michelle, if you are a defensive player and you do everything in your power to avoid the head or neck area, and then you incidentally make contact due to the strike zone changing and that defenseless player changing the position of his body, you can throw the flag and have targeting, but you should not be ejected because you did not do anything that warrants an ejection or a disqualification out of that game. I don't think it does anything that makes this sport safer by telling a defensive player that he did everything right, but he still got to go sit in the locker room. Now let me get to the nuance of what actually happened on Saturday, and this is where I really agree with Urban Meyer. My frustration is with the replay booth, because that replay booth made a clear error. If you just take the kinetic movement from a physics perspective of that hit, the head moved forward and not back. If you make forcible contact with the head or neck area, that head is going to move back, not forward, in kind of a whiplash style of mode. So just that should have taken the targeting off. But it didn't. They upheld the targeting call, and then all of a sudden Denzel Ward has to be basically shamed. He's going to feel terrible. He's got to walk off the field in front of 100,000 fans and 2.6 million viewers watching at home on Fox Sports, and really the mistake was made by a guy in his 50s up in an air-conditioned booth that's getting paid for the day. That's what's wrong for it. We need to call out these replay officials when they make mistakes like they did on Saturday.
I would add one other thing to that, Joel and Michelle, is that let's say Ward's penalty was the second half of that game. He would have to sit out the second half, obviously, in the first half of the next game. I think that a rule could be changed right now. We don't have to wait. That if this happens again in the second half of a game and it's clear that the officials have made a mistake, the suspension is lifted. Right now, I don't know that there's a mechanism to lift that suspension. So never too late to fix a mistake. So let's get this fixed right now. If there's a mistake made in the second half, give the player back the first half of the next game.
You know what's interesting, Coach, is I believe that the conferences across the country, they do have that autonomy to behave in that fashion if they deemed necessary. Now, we're not going to see that because, of course, you brought up the scenario. That was a first-half hit, not a second-half hit. But I believe that that is, let's just say, there's no rule that they can't do that. They can't review a suspension or a disqualification and then rescind that type of punishment. And I will go not a step further, but in the same vein, Damon Arnett, the other corner for Ohio State, he had a second-half targeting penalty in which he clearly targeted the head or neck area of Max Bortenschlager, the quarterback from Maryland. That's where I'm not one of these guys that thinks we need to throw targeting out. It's not the baby with the bathwater here. That's clearly deserved a penalty and an ejection, and Urban Meyer would agree with you on that one as well.
Joel, before we let you go, you and Gus are going to be calling Ohio State again on Saturday, the game against Nebraska. You heard our conversation. You were listening down the line in the studio, what we were talking about with Nebraska and kind of their frustration of the fan base and their place in the college football universe right now. What do you make of kind of where Nebraska is as a program right now, and what can be done to get it back to, let's say, competing on the same plane that Wisconsin's competing on?
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to that question, Rev. First and foremost, I grew up in Colorado as a Colorado Buffalo fan during, the 80s and 90s. So I saw what I feel like is one of the great periods of college football from a program in the Nebraska Cornhuskers during that time in which Colorado was trying to be their rival. So, you know, it's an interesting perspective to have as I sit here and watch this program try to get back to what they are. I will say this about college football. The separation of classes between the haves and the have-nots has increased as the revenue has increased, okay? So what these top-end programs have and what they have in particular when it comes to recruiting and their recruiting base in their own backyard is much different than what it used to be in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So in some respect, we have to understand that fan bases across the country are most guilty when it comes to a lack of reasonable expectations. I'm not telling Nebraska fans that they shouldn't have high expectations. I am telling you, though, that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort to get back to a point where you're competing for a national championship. Right now, they need to look at incremental goals like the division. And you look at the game against Wisconsin and you say, okay, how do we put ourselves on the playing field that Wisconsin is on so that we can go and compete with them and potentially win a conference championship, which they haven't won in nearly, 17, 18 years now. And if they're able to do that, then you can start talking about expectations north of a conference championship. But for me, fan bases have got to start looking at incremental goals. And I don't know if Mike Riley's the guy to do that, or maybe it's the next guy to do that. I will tell you this. If you're a head coach, and Coach, you're going to back me up on this, I know it. One of the worst positions to be in is working for a guy that didn't hire you. So Mike Riley, whether he wins big or not for the course of this year, is going to be on some precarious ground as we move forward.
I will speak for him. You are preaching to the choir on that one. Joel Klatt, great stuff as always. Have a really good call on Saturday night. Look forward to hearing it.
You bet. See you guys.